Greetings and salutations, everybody. Today we're going to take a look at a game I made in GameMaker. This one's actually made fairly recently. However, I haven't made a GameMaker game specifically since before it was owned by YoYo Games. So this is going to be kind of like a little bit of a show and tell, but I'm going to go ahead and go into some of the rooms and some of the objects I made, and generally how my layer structure works in this environment. So here we go. So this is the title screen, and right now I've got a couple layers, and I can probably show you some of them by turning them on. So the title screen has a shake layer, and that's for when the slime gets hit. I don't actually have a program to shake the screen programmatically. I just enable the shake layer for half a second when the slime gets hit, and it boop, does that. I also have sort of like a cave light system for when you go underground. We'll take a look at that in a moment. I've just got a player layer. I've got this layer where I draw sort of like things text-wise. And then the collision layer is fun. So that's how I enable collisions for that tile set. It's a little tedious. I'm sure there are probably better ways to do it, but I went ahead and did it that way. Ironically, I probably could have just used the ground layer, and that would have been a good enough collision. So let's go ahead and look at one of the rooms. Let me go ahead and minimize some of these here. And we're going to go to a room. Let's go to Forest Home. So this is, there we go. So this is the very large hub world that we can go into. There are a couple enemies here, right? We've got this mushroom gentleman who goes left and right. We have a snail over here. He's just doing snail stuff. And then we have a bee and a bird. I wanted to include flying enemies. So the ground enemies, obviously, they move left and right, more or less. But the flying enemies, they just sort of sit there until you get close enough, and then they'll come at you. So those are two different enemy behaviors for this game. And then the will-o-wisps, which are a sort of like third type of enemy, they will fly along a set path. I'll bring up a will-o-wisp here. You can see it. They do an animation. So those are those types of enemies. And I have some enemy code in here. I won't go into great depths, but I have some basic crate scripts, right? You give them stats, start them on a basic path, some variables and functions for taking damage and dying. And then I went ahead and flipped the sprite whenever it's going in the appropriate direction, right? So they move back and forth basically if they're that type. And then some functions for dying and whether or not they're invincible. So the way that I have the enemies working in this game is they are invincible immediately after they get hit for a period of time. The other thing that I have in these levels, you notice these little apples, right? Those are the fruits. So that's object food. And all the food does, really, is sorry, hang on. There we go. So all the food does is it just adds to your score. But the food has a fun little behavior, right? So the first part of the behavior is this initialization, where I take the food sprite and I just say, you can be one of these three things. And so it gets a little bit, so I don't have to worry about placing, individual apples or pears or strawberries. It's just sort of like procedurally generated whenever I spawn a fruit there. And then it bobs up and down because, as we all know, fruit does that. And obviously I've got whether or not the fruit is colliding with the player. Now, what I do for the fruit, though, this is to make it more aligned with the slime. And if you've seen the game, I'll link to it so you can play it and see what I'm talking about. But basically, whenever the fruit collides with the player, I have the fruit shrink over time and also try to stay within the player. So it's like the slime is eating it, which I think is just fun. And what I also do for the fruit, this one is the fun part here, is I set its blend mode to additive, right? So that the fruit can appear like translucent, like it's being digested. That's the main thing. You got enemies and food, and then I've obviously got the exits, which go places. And then the object player, I'm not gonna, he's got a lot of stuff, but he has player platformer controls and things of that nature. Now, the slime character that you control starts out as a blue slime. You can actually change his form, his color, basically, his elemental nature, by going into one of these sort of like vortexes. So there's a fire one, right, for fire slimes, and there's an air one for air slimes. And these ones in the home area unlock after you've unlocked them in another level, right? So you can go, you start here, you go and blah, 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 and you can't jump up here until you can double jump, which is an ability the fire slime has. So you go in this dungeon, and then you can't go over here all the way to the end until you unlock the wind slime, which allows you to glide. And it's very funny. I have the slime flattened out, so he just sort of like goes there. I'll definitely link to the video that shows the actual gameplay because I think it's really fun. But that's basically how that works, and obviously potions work the same way that food does, except that potions restore your health to max. So that's that. So let me see. So I talked about the shake layer, yep, and the enemies and the food and the power-ups, and then I have a little cave light, and you obviously can't, right now it's a very large area. However, what happens with the cave light is whenever you go into the cave, and let me see if I can highlight it here. So I have a cave zone essentially. Like once you collide with this, then the cave light turns on, and when you exit that area, the cave light turns off, right? So the cave light is sort of like a very aggressive vignette. That's what it is. It's a vignette layer. It's one of the many effect layers that GameMaker has come by default. So I just turn the vignette layer on whenever I'm down here, and it gives a nice little cave effect. I originally had like a cave color, but I didn't like it. But I kept it in, in case I ever want to do something with it in the future. And then I have different layers of things. But yeah, and all the text on the little windows is drawn sort of like on the on GUI draw function, I think, for the event, I mean. So you don't see it here, but they do get drawn when it goes. But yeah, that's basically it. There's not too much else. You just got your exits, your start things. So the way that I did in Unity, I usually have like a transform where the player just basically spawns at one of the starting transforms based on a variable set when they went to the next level. GameMaker doesn't have that by default, but I just made game objects so that the player could just start at one of several game objects. There's probably a much better way of doing that, but that's what I did there. And so yeah, so that's that. And then when you get to the Slime Valley, that's when you get all the fun slimes. You get all the apples and fruits. See all the slimes; they're really cool. So yeah, give the game a check out if you want to. I made it over the course of a couple weeks. I enjoyed it. But yeah, first GameMaker game in a long time, maybe maybe over a decade, honestly. But yeah, that's basically it, and I hope you had a fun time looking at this, and I'll see you next time.